8th grade. Martin really liked my anime jokes that I made in a previous video. So he asked if I could make a joke about his favorite show, Assault on Titan. And so here it is. Well, it's not his favorite show, but it's one of his favorites. Um, what is a Titan's favorite food? Raw men. That was for you, Martin. All right. So we are going to be beginning our lesson today on Chapter 7. Chapter 7, Section 1, which you guys have already read, is about, okay, pretend you didn't see that tab. I make my jokes up myself, people. I don't get them off the internet. Chapter 7 is about the Industrial Revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution is something that begins before the Civil War. It begins, in fact, a long time before the Civil War, around the year 1800, and it actually extends long after the Civil War. Although we are only going to be focusing on part of the Industrial Revolution, the pre-Civil War Industrial Revolution. So we're going to be talking about how this part of the Industrial Revolution led to further divisions between the North and the South, how it fueled tensions over slavery, how it moved the country forward in terms of developing its infrastructure and its wealth and its power on a global stage. So the Industrial Revolution has a lot of pros and it also has a lot of cons. And I want you to be thinking about not just the good stuff that it caused, but also a lot of the harm that it caused, right? And I don't want you to focus just on the harm it caused, like the harm it caused to the environment or exploitation of child and immigrant labor. All of that bad stuff happened, but it also caused a lot of good things for the country too, right? It made the prices of goods and services a lot more affordable, for example. It improved the quality of people's lives for the most part. It extended the life expectancy in the United States pretty significantly. So the Industrial Revolution was both good and bad. So yeah, I want you to keep both of those in mind. So we're going to be covering it from the year 1800 all the way to 1845. All right, so what does the Industrial Revolution contain? Well, to understand this, we have to understand that in Europe, the Industrial Revolution began in the 1700s. So Europe was a little bit ahead of the United States in its industrial development. So especially in France and England. In the 1700s, there were a lot of new inventions that changed the way that people worked and changed the way that people lived. So we see a lot of tools and machines being created that replace human manpower, right? We see a lot of water and steam powered machines that replace the work that oxen and horses and people used to do, right? And these changes mark the beginning of a period of history known as the Industrial Revolution, which is a term we use to describe a period of time in which people begin to make money by producing goods inside of mills and factories rather than on farms or in their homes. So the Industrial Revolution in Europe is one of the most important events in European history. And in the United States, it's also one of the most important events in US history. All right, so let's talk a little bit about technology of the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution really begins when textile machines, these are machines that make products out of cloth, right? So clothing, blankets, sails, flags, banners, pretty much anything that uses cloth is a textile machine, right? So the Industrial Revolution begins when textile machines make it possible for large amounts of product to be created in these textile mills instead of by individuals in their homes. So the way that people used to have bed sheets and blankets and clothing and things like that is usually the matriarch, the mother of the household, would create these in the home. Right? She would create clothing for herself, for her children, for her husband, and this is very labor intensive. It's expensive. Clothes would have to be durable enough to survive for long periods of time because it takes a really long time to make these clothes. Well, with the introduction of these new textile machines in these mills and factories, clothing production explodes. So all of a sudden we have this huge flood of new textile products being developed. And whenever you have an overabundance of supply, what happens to the price of that good that's being produced? It goes down, right? When you have a lot of a product, the price goes down. So textile products become affordable to basically everyone. All right. We're going to talk about what the implications of that is later. All right, so in the beginning, these new fancy textile machines were powered by water, right? You would need flowing water in order to move the machinery, right? Flowing water would move the gears that operate the machinery in these textile mills. And in order to have a natural source of flowing water, you would have to build these textile mills on riverbanks, right, next to large flowing rivers. And this is good because it means that basically nature is powering a large portion of your machinery. But there's some bad stuff that happens because of that too, which we'll get to in a later slide. So because these mills are built next to rivers, this means that workers at these mills have to travel to these mills that are built by rivers. Right? So workers who were previously living in the countryside on farms, they would have to move near these factories, which were by rivers. Now, most rivers had cities attached to them, right? Cities were built alongside rivers. If you have a large group of people living in a small area, that large group of people is going to have access to natural resources, especially water. So it makes sense to build a city near a river. Factories are built near rivers. So you have massive amounts of people who are used to living in the countryside on farms, moving into these cities to live near these factories, which are near flowing water, near rivers. All right. So these laborers travel to these factories and mills to work, and they work a specific number of hours per day, and they work at a specific pace in order to keep up with the machines. Right? Machines don't need to take breaks. Workers do. So factories develop shifts that workers have to take. So maybe one worker is going to work a 10-hour shift, right, during the daytime, and then another worker is going to work an 8-hour shift, and then another worker is going to work a 6-hour shift, right? And that way the machines keep going 24 hours a day, and the workers working alongside the machines can keep up with it. So these mills and factories are very good at producing products and generating profits, but they're extremely expensive to build, right? Building a factory and filling it with machinery is not cheap. So in order to build a mill or a factory, a mill owner had to rely on a group of people called capitalists. And this is where we get the word capitalism from. A capitalist is a person who invests money into a business, right? And the money they invest is called capital. So the money that is invested into a business is used to purchase land that the factory is going to be built on, the materials need to construct the factory, the labor that you need to fill the factory, the machinery, the raw material that you feed into the machinery, etc., etc., right? So you need a lot of capital from capitalists in order to build a factory, right? And then when the mill or factory makes money, a portion of the profits goes to the capitalists, the people who invested their money into the mill or the factory. Right? And this is, in a nutshell, kind of how a relationship that capitalism relies on. Right? So, yeah, basically, these mill factory owners got a bunch of investors together. These investors are capitalists. They all pump money into this project, and in return, they get a good chunk of the profits that the factory or the mill makes. Right? Now, what happens if the factory or mill doesn't make money? Right? Maybe there's a war, maybe there's a fire, maybe there's a natural disaster. Right? Maybe the river that the mill is built alongside freezes during the winter and the factory has to shut down its production because the machines can't work with a frozen river next to it because you need flowing water to make the machines work. What happens to these capitalists? They don't make any money, right? They lose their investment. So being a capitalist is very, very risky, right? It's a high risk, high reward kind of enterprise. Okay, so building factories alongside rivers in rural areas had a lot of advantages and it had a lot of disadvantages. So in the previous slide, I said a lot of factories were built in cities. That's true. Other factories were built in rural areas. So we're gonna compare and contrast a little bit here, right? So the main advantage in building a factory alongside a river is you have the flowing water of the river, which provides a free natural power source. So the flowing of the water generates power that can spin gears, can spin machinery, and get things going. Right? The disadvantages are that because factories rely on this flow of water for power, if there's a drought, that's a problem, right? If the river freezes, that's another problem. If there's a flood, that could damage the factory, right? That could be a problem. And in the case of factories being built in rural areas, it was really hard to find workers who'd be able to travel out to these rural areas to go work. Now, all of this changes with the invention of something called the steam engine, right? The steam engine allows factory machinery to use steam power, not flowing river water, to power machines. So people figure out, okay, river water is nice when we have it, but we can't rely on it throughout the year, right? Natural events like weather changes can damage our ability to produce goods if we rely exclusively on flowing water. So we need some other way to power machines. And where there's a will, there's a way. People invent steam-powered machines where you don't actually need flowing river water. This allows more factories to be built in cities away from rivers, right? Another advantage of building in a city is you can have women and children work in your factories, and you don't have to pay women and children as much as you have to pay men. because women and children are smaller and weaker and not able to be as productive in a factory. So building factories